The clock on the courthouse wall showed 7:30 p.m. when Judge Maria Thompson finally closed the last file on her desk. She rubbed her tired eyes and let out a long breath. It had been one of those days that reminded her why being a judge was both the best and hardest job in the world. Maria was 45 years old, with kind brown eyes and graying hair that she always kept neat and professional. She had been a judge for 8 years now, but she still remembered her first day on the bench like it was yesterday. Back then, she was nervous and excited. Today, she just felt tired. The day had started with a robbery case. A young man, barely 19, had stolen food from a grocery store to feed his little sister. Maria had to follow the law, but her heart broke for the boy. Then came a domestic violence case that lasted 3 hours. A woman with bruises on her face sat in the witness chair, telling her story with shaking hands. Maria had seen too many cases like this, and each one stayed with her long after court ended. The last case was about a man who had been caught driving drunk for the 3rd time. He sat there making excuses, showing no shame for putting innocent people in danger. Maria had to sentence him to jail time, and his family cried in the back of the courtroom. Days like this made her question if she was making any real difference in the world. Maria packed her papers into her briefcase and stood up from her chair. Her office was on the 4th floor of the courthouse, and she could see the city lights starting to twinkle outside her window. She thought about her husband David waiting at home, probably cooking dinner and helping their 12-year-old daughter Sarah with her homework. That thought made her smile for the first time all day. She walked down the quiet hallway, her heels clicking. On the marble floor, the courthouse was almost empty now. Only a few security guards and cleaning staff were still around. Maria liked this time of day when the building was peaceful and quiet. During the day, it was full of lawyers, defendants, families, and drama. But at night, it felt calm and safe. The elevator took her down to the parking garage in the basement. The garage was dimly lit, with concrete walls and low ceilings that made it feel like a cave. Most of the parking spots were empty now. Maria's silver BMW was parked in her usual spot near the elevator. She had bought the car 3 years ago after getting a small raise. It was her pride and joy, and she had worked hard to afford it, growing up. Maria's family had been poor. Her mother cleaned offices at night, and her father worked at a factory during the day. They lived in a small apartment in the rough part of town, where nice cars like BMWs were only seen in movies or driving through the neighborhood with their windows up. Maria remembered pressing her nose against the window as a child, watching those fancy cars and dreaming of a different life. She had studied hard in school, working part-time jobs to pay for books and supplies. College was even harder, but she never gave up. Law school nearly broke her, both financially and emotionally. There were times when she wanted to quit, when the other students seemed smarter and richer, when she felt like she didn't belong. But her parents never let her give up. They believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. The BMW represented everything she had achieved. It wasn't just a car to her. It was proof that she had made it, that all those years of struggle had been worth it. Every time she drove it, she felt proud of how far she had come. As Maria walked toward her car, she didn't notice the police officer standing in the shadows near the exit. Officer Derek Mitchell was 38 years old and had been a cop for 12 years. He was tall and thick, with short brown hair and suspicious eyes that seemed to see danger everywhere. Mitchell was doing his regular patrol of the area when he decided to check the courthouse parking garage. Mitchell had been having a bad week. His wife had been complaining about money again, and his teenage son had been getting into trouble at school. His supervisor had also been on his case about his arrest numbers being too low. The pressure was getting to him, and he was looking for any reason to make an arrest and prove his worth. When Mitchell saw Maria walking toward the BMW, his mind immediately jumped to the worst conclusion. In his experience, young black women didn't usually drive expensive cars unless something illegal was going on. He had seen plenty of car thefts in his career, and this situation looked suspicious to him. The woman looked nervous, he thought, and she kept looking around like she was afraid of being caught. Of course, Maria wasn't nervous about stealing anything. She was just tired and eager to get home. She was looking around because the parking garage was poorly lit and felt a little creepy at night. But Mitchell couldn't see past his own assumptions and prejudices. Maria reached her car and started looking through her purse for her keys. She was thinking about what to make for dinner and whether Sarah had finished her math homework. She had no idea that she was being watched and judged by someone who had already decided she was up to no good. Mitchell stepped out of the shadows and started walking toward her. His hand moved to his radio, ready to call for backup if needed. He had convinced himself that he was about to stop a crime in progress. In his mind, he was being a good cop, protecting the community from criminals. But Maria was not a criminal. She was a respected judge who had dedicated her life to justice and fairness. She was a mother, a wife, and a pillar of the community. She was also a black woman in America, which meant that even her success and status couldn't protect her from the prejudice and assumptions of others. As Mitchell got closer, Maria finally found her keys. She pulled them out and pressed the button to unlock her car. The BMW's lights flashed, and she heard the familiar beep that meant her car was ready. She was just a few steps away from getting in and driving home to her family. That's when Officer Mitchell called out to her. "Excuse me, miss," he said in a voice that was both authoritative and suspicious. "I need you to step away from that vehicle." Maria looked up, confused and startled. She saw a police officer walking toward her with his hand on his radio. Her heart started beating faster, and she felt a cold fear wash over her. She had done nothing wrong, but she knew that sometimes that didn't matter. The confrontation that would change everything was about to begin. Maria's heart jumped in her chest when she heard the officer's voice. She turned around slowly, her car keys still in her hand. The parking garage suddenly felt much colder and darker than it had a moment before. She looked at the police officer walking toward her and tried to understand what was happening. "I'm sorry, officer," Maria said, keeping her voice calm and polite. "Is there a problem?" Officer Mitchell continued walking toward her, his eyes never leaving her face. He was studying her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. In his mind, everything about the situation looked wrong. A young black woman in an expensive car late at night in a mostly empty parking garage. It had to be theft. "This your car?" Mitchell asked, pointing at the BMW. His tone made it clear that he didn't believe it could be hers. Maria felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She had experienced this kind of suspicion before, though never quite like this. When she was younger, store employees would follow her around, assuming she was going to steal something. When she bought her house in a nice neighborhood, some neighbors had questioned whether she really belonged there. But this felt more serious and more dangerous. "Yes, this is my car," Maria answered, holding up her keys. The BMW's logo was clearly visible on the key ring. "I just finished work and I'm heading home." Mitchell looked at the keys, but his suspicion didn't fade. Car thieves were getting smarter these days, he thought. They had all kinds of ways to get keys and fool people. He had seen it all in his 12 years on the force, or at least that's what he told himself. "I'm going to need to see some identification," Mitchell said, moving closer. "And I'll need proof that this vehicle belongs to you." Maria's professional training kicked in. As a judge, she had dealt with police officers hundreds of times. She knew that staying calm was important, but she also knew her rights. She reached slowly into her purse, making sure her movements were clear and non-threatening. "Of course, officer," she said, pulling out her wallet. "Here's my driver's license." She handed him the license, hoping this would clear up whatever misunderstanding. was happening? The license clearly showed her name, address, and photo. It was current and legitimate. But when Mitchell looked at it, his frown only got deeper. Maria Thompson, he read aloud, looking back and forth between the license and her face. And you're telling me this BMW is registered to Maria Thompson? Yes, that's correct, Maria said, starting to feel frustrated. Officer, I don't understand what the problem is. I've shown you my license. This is my car. I work in this building right here. She pointed toward the courthouse entrance. Mitchell barely glanced in the direction she was pointing. His focus remained on her, as if she were a criminal he had caught red-handed. In his experience, people who stole cars often had fake IDs or stolen licenses. This woman seemed too calm, too prepared with her answers. Real car owners usually got more flustered when questioned by police. What kind of work do you do? Mitchell asked, still holding her license. I work in the courthouse, Maria replied, trying to keep the irritation out of her voice. She didn't want to reveal that she was a judge just yet. Sometimes when people found out about her job, they treated her differently, and she wanted to see how this situation would play out naturally. Mitchell nodded, but he wasn't satisfied. Doing what? Cleaning? Security? The question hit Maria like a slap in the face. She was dressed in a professional navy blue suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and clearly looked like someone who worked in a professional capacity. But Mitchell automatically assumed she must have a lower-level job. The prejudice in his assumption was clear and hurtful. I work in a professional capacity, Maria said, her voice getting slightly colder. Officer, I've shown you my identification. I've answered your questions. What exactly is the problem here? Mitchell didn't like her tone. In his experience, innocent people were usually more cooperative and less defensive. Guilty people got angry when questioned. They tried to turn things around and make the officer look bad. This woman was starting to fit that pattern. The problem is that I've seen a lot of car thefts in this area, Mitchell said, his voice getting more authoritative. Young people, expensive cars, late at night, it's a common scenario. I'm just doing my job, trying to prevent crime. Maria felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew that getting emotional would only make things worse. But she also couldn't believe what was happening. She was being treated like a criminal for the simple act of walking to her own car. Officer, I understand you're doing your job, Maria said carefully, but I am not a young person trying to steal a car. I am a 45-year-old professional woman trying to go home after a long day at work. I have shown you my identification. My keys work in this car. What more do you need? Mitchell looked at her again, taking in her appearance more carefully. She was older than he had first thought, and she was dressed professionally. But he had already committed to this course of action, and backing down now would make him look foolish. Besides, criminals came in all ages and dressed in all kinds of ways. I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle while I run your license, Mitchell said, reaching for his radio. And I'm going to call for backup. Maria's eyes widened. Backup? Officer, this is ridiculous. I'm not resisting or causing any problems. I'm just trying to get in my own car. But Mitchell was already pressing the button on his radio. Unit 47 requesting backup at the courthouse parking garage. Possible vehicle theft in progress. The words "vehicle theft in progress" echoed through the empty parking garage. Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. In a matter of minutes, she had gone from being a respected judge heading home after work to being treated like a car thief. Other courthouse employees, who were leaving late, started to notice the commotion. A few people stopped to see what was happening. Maria recognized some of them, lawyers and clerks who had been in her courtroom. The embarrassment was almost as bad as the fear. Officer, please, Maria said, her voice starting to shake slightly. There's been a misunderstanding. I am Judge Maria Thompson. I work in this courthouse. This is my car. You can verify all of this very easily. But Mitchell wasn't listening anymore. He had called for backup, and now he had to follow through. In his mind, admitting he was wrong would make him look incompetent. He had to see this through to the end. As they waited for backup to arrive, Maria stood by her car feeling humiliated and frightened. She thought about her family waiting at home, wondering where she was. She thought about all the defendants who had stood in her courtroom, and how some of them must have felt when they were wrongly accused. The sound of sirens in the distance meant that things were about to get much more complicated. The sirens got louder and louder until 2 police cars came speeding into the parking garage. Their red and blue lights flashed across the concrete walls, making everything look like a scary movie scene. Maria watched in shock as 4 more police officers got out of their cars and walked toward her. She had never felt so small and helpless in her entire life. Here she was, a respected judge who had spent years making important decisions and helping people find justice, and now she was surrounded by police officers who thought she was a criminal. The irony was not lost on her, but it didn't make the situation any less frightening. Officer Mitchell walked over to the other officers and started explaining the situation. Maria could hear bits and pieces of what he was saying. Suspicious behavior, expensive car, possible theft, and uncooperative. Each word felt like a knife cutting into her dignity. One of the new officers, a young man who looked like he had just started the job, kept staring at Maria with curious eyes. Another officer, an older woman with gray hair, seemed more careful and thoughtful as she listened to Mitchell's report. The third officer looked bored, like this was just another routine call for him, but it was the 4th officer who caught Maria's attention. Detective Sarah Collins was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a calm way of moving that suggested she had seen a lot in her career. She listened to Mitchell's explanation but kept looking at Maria with a puzzled expression, like she was trying to remember something important. "So what exactly did you see her doing?" Detective Collins asked Mitchell. "I saw her approaching the vehicle in a suspicious manner," Mitchell explained. "She was looking around nervously, acting like she was afraid of being caught. When I approached her, she became defensive and uncooperative." Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. "That's not true," she said loudly. "I was tired and looking for my keys. I answered all your questions politely. I showed you my identification." "Ma'am, please remain quiet while we sort this out," the young officer said, putting his hand up to silence her. Detective Collins held up her hand to stop him. "Actually, let her speak. Ma'am, can you tell me your name and what you were doing here tonight?" Maria took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. She knew that how she handled this moment would be very important. "My name is Maria Thompson. I work in this courthouse. I'm a judge. I was leaving work late tonight and walking to my car when Officer Mitchell approached me and accused me of trying to steal it." The word judge seemed to hang in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Detective Collins' eyes widened slightly, and she looked at Maria more carefully. The other officers seemed confused, like they weren't sure if they had heard correctly. "Did you say you're a judge?" Detective Collins asked slowly. "Yes, I'm Judge Maria Thompson. I preside over courtroom 4B in this building. I've been on the bench for 8 years. Maria's voice was steady, but inside she was shaking with anger and humiliation. Detective Collins felt her stomach drop. She had heard of Judge Thompson, though they had never met in person. The judge had a reputation for being fair but tough, especially in cases involving domestic violence and crimes against children. She was well respected in the legal community and known for her integrity. "Your Honor," Detective Collins said, using the formal title that judges deserve, "I am so sorry about this situation. There has clearly been a misunderstanding." Officer Mitchell looked confused and a little panicked. He had never called a judge a car thief before, and he was starting to realize that his career might be in serious trouble. "How was I supposed to know she was a judge?" he said defensively. Maybe you could have asked before assuming she was a criminal, Detective Collins replied sharply. She turned back to Maria with an apologetic expression. Your Honor, can you show us your courthouse identification? Maria reached into her briefcase and pulled out her official courthouse ID badge. It had her photo, her name, and her title. Judge Maria Thompson, District Court. She also pulled out several business cards that clearly identified her as a judge. The young officer whistled softly. I can't believe this, he muttered. Detective Collins examined the ID carefully though. She already knew it was real. Your Honor, this is completely unacceptable. You should never have been put in this position. Meanwhile, more people were starting to gather around the scene. Court clerks, lawyers, and security guards who worked in the courthouse had heard the sirens and came down to see what was happening. When they saw Judge Thompson surrounded by police officers, they were shocked and confused. Is that Judge Thompson? One of the court clerks whispered to another. What's going on? I think that police officer thought she was stealing her own car, the other clerk whispered back. This is unbelievable. Maria could hear the whispers and feel the stares of her colleagues. She had always been proud of her reputation and her standing in the community. Now she felt like that reputation was being damaged by this ridiculous situation. She wondered if people would always remember this incident when they thought of her. Officer Mitchell was starting to sweat. He looked around at all the people watching and realized that this story would probably be all over the courthouse by tomorrow morning. Every lawyer, judge, and clerk would know that he had accused Judge Thompson of stealing her own car. Your Honor, he said, his voice much quieter and more respectful than before. I made an error in judgment. I apologize for the misunderstanding. But Maria wasn't ready to accept his apology yet. She looked at him with the same serious expression she used in her courtroom when she was about to make an important ruling. Officer Mitchell, she said slowly, this wasn't just a misunderstanding. You saw a black woman approaching a nice car and automatically assumed she must be stealing it. You didn't consider that she might own the car. You didn't consider that she might be a professional person who works in this building. You made assumptions based on my race, and those assumptions were wrong. The parking garage was completely quiet now except for the sound of the police car radios crackling in the background. Everyone was listening to what Judge Thompson was saying, and everyone knew she was right. Detective Collins felt embarrassed for her department and angry at Officer Mitchell for creating this situation. She knew that this incident would reflect badly on all of them, and she also knew that Judge Thompson had every right to be upset. Your Honor, Detective Collins said, you are absolutely right. This should never have happened, and we will make sure it doesn't happen again. But Maria wasn't finished yet. She had more to say about what had just happened to her, and everyone was going to listen. Judge Maria Thompson looked around at all the faces staring at her. Police officers, courthouse workers, lawyers, and security guards were all waiting to hear what she would say next. She had their complete attention, and she knew this was an important moment that could change things for the better or make them worse. I want everyone here to understand what just happened, Maria said, her voice clear and strong. I was not acting suspiciously. I was not nervous or afraid of being caught doing something wrong. I was tired after a long day of work, and I was simply walking to my own car to go home to my family. Officer Mitchell looked down at his feet, unable to meet her eyes. He knew she was right, but admitting it out loud felt impossible. His whole career had been built on trusting his instincts, on being able to spot trouble before it happened. But tonight, his instincts had been completely wrong. Officer Mitchell, Maria continued, you saw a black woman near an expensive car and immediately thought crime. You didn't see a professional person leaving work. You didn't see a mother trying to get home to her family. You didn't see a judge who has dedicated her life to justice and fairness. You saw my skin color, and you made assumptions. The parking garage was so quiet that everyone could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above them. Detective Collins felt sick to her stomach. She had seen racial profiling before in her career, but it was always shocking when it happened so clearly and obviously. One of the court clerks, a young black woman named Ashley, stepped forward from the crowd. "Your Honor," she said softly, "this happens to us all the time. Just because you're a judge doesn't mean you're safe from it." Ashley was right, and Maria knew it. She had been lucky in her career, moving in professional circles where her education and position usually protected her from the worst kinds of discrimination. But tonight reminded her that no black person in America was completely safe from prejudice, no matter how successful they became. "You're absolutely right, Ashley," Maria said, nodding to the young woman. "And that's exactly why this situation is so important. If this can happen to me with all my education and professional status, imagine what happens to people who don't have those advantages." Officer Mitchell finally looked up from his feet. His face was red with embarrassment and shame. "Your Honor, I really am sorry. I made a mistake, and I know that my apology isn't enough to fix what happened here tonight." "No, it's not enough," Maria agreed, "but it's a start. The question is, what are you going to do to make sure this never happens again?" Mitchell had no idea how to answer that question. He had always thought of himself as a fair person who treated everyone equally. He had black friends and colleagues. He had never considered himself racist. But tonight forced him to look at his own behavior in a new way. Detective Collins stepped forward. "Your Honor, Officer Mitchell will be required to attend sensitivity training and implicit bias workshops. This incident will go in his personnel file, and he will be closely supervised for the next 6 months." "That's good," Maria said, "but it's not just about punishing Officer Mitchell. This is about examining the systems and attitudes that made this situation possible in the first place." She turned to address all the police officers present. "How many of you have made similar assumptions? How many times have you approached someone because they looked suspicious in a way that was really about their race or their appearance?" The officers shifted uncomfortably. Some of them had to admit to themselves that they had probably done similar things, though maybe not as obviously as Mitchell had tonight. "I deal with the consequences of these assumptions every day in my courtroom," Maria continued. "I see young black men who have been stopped and searched for no good reason. I see families torn apart because someone made assumptions about guilt or innocence based on skin color. I see how these prejudices affect real people's lives." A lawyer named Robert Chun, who had appeared in Maria's courtroom many times, spoke up from the crowd. "Your Honor, what can we do to help? This is unacceptable, and we want to support you." Maria looked at all the faces around her, some embarrassed, some angry, some sad, but all paying attention. She realized that this terrible experience might actually become an opportunity to create positive change. "We need to have honest conversations about bias and prejudice," she said. "Not just in the police department, but in the courthouse, in our law firms, in our entire justice system. We need to admit that these problems exist before we can fix them." The young police officer who had told Maria to be quiet earlier raised his hand nervously. "Your Honor, I've only been on the force for 6 months. Can you help us understand what we should do differently?" Maria appreciated his honesty and willingness to learn. "First, question your assumptions. When you see someone and think they look suspicious, ask yourself why. Is it because of their behavior, or is it because of their race or appearance? Second, treat everyone with dignity and respect, even when you're investigating something. And third, listen when people tell you who they are instead of deciding for yourself." Officer Mitchell finally found his voice again. "Your Honor, I grew up in a mostly white neighborhood, and I realize now that I don't understand what it's like to be judged because of the color of your skin. Tonight showed me that I have a lot to learn." "We all have a lot to learn," Maria replied. "The difference is whether we're willing to do the work to learn it." Detective Collins looked at her watch and realized that this conversation had been going on for almost an hour. Judge Thompson's family was probably worried about her. And there were still practical matters to resolve. "Your Honor," she said, "is there anything else we can do tonight to address this situation? And do you plan to file a formal complaint?" Maria considered the question carefully. She could file a complaint that might end Officer Mitchell's career. She could demand disciplinary action that would satisfy her anger. Or she could try to turn this negative experience into something positive that might help other people avoid similar situations. "I'll be speaking with the police chief tomorrow," she said finally. "But right now, I just want to go home to my family and try to process what happened here tonight." She looked around at everyone one more time. "I hope all of you will remember this night and use it to examine your own assumptions and biases. Change starts with each individual person deciding to do better." With that, Judge Maria Thompson finally got into her BMW and drove away, leaving behind a parking garage full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. The drive home felt different for Judge Maria Thompson. Usually she enjoyed her evening drive, using the quiet time to transition from work to family life. But tonight, her hands shook slightly on the steering wheel and her mind kept replaying the events in the parking garage. She had handled the situation with dignity and strength, but now that she was alone, the full emotional impact hit her when Maria pulled into her driveway. She sat in her car for a few minutes before going inside. She could see the warm lights in her house windows and knew her family was waiting for her. Her husband David was probably wondering why she was so late, and their daughter Sarah might be worried. How could she explain what had happened without frightening them or making them angry? David met her at the door, his face showing immediate concern when he saw her expression. "Maria, what's wrong? You look upset." Maria hugged him tightly, feeling safe in his arms for the first time since the ordeal began. "Something happened at work tonight," she said quietly. "A police officer thought I was stealing my own car." David's face went through several emotions: confusion, anger, and then protective fury. "What? Are you serious? What did you do?" "I stayed calm and handled it professionally," Maria said. "But David, it was scary. For a few minutes there, I felt like I was just another black woman being profiled by the police. Not a judge, not a professional, just another suspect." Their daughter Sarah came running to the door when she heard her mother's voice. At 12 years old, she was smart enough to sense when something was wrong. "Mom, why are you so late? And why do you look sad?" Maria knelt down to hug her daughter. How do you explain racial profiling to a child? How do you tell your daughter that some people might judge her by her skin color before they know anything about her character or abilities? "I had a difficult situation at work tonight, sweetheart," Maria said carefully. "But it's resolved now, and I'm home safe with my family." Later that night, after Sarah went to bed, Maria and David sat at their kitchen table drinking tea and talking about what had happened. David was angry and wanted to take immediate action. He talked about calling lawyers, demanding the officer be fired, and making sure the story got media attention. "I understand why you're angry," Maria told him. "I'm angry too. But I want to handle this in a way that creates positive change, not just punishment." The next morning, Maria woke up feeling determined. She had spent years in the justice system, and she knew that real change happens slowly, through education and persistence, not through anger and revenge. She had a plan. Her first call was to Police Chief Robert Martinez. Chief Martinez had worked with the courts for many years and respected Judge Thompson greatly. When she told him what had happened, he was shocked and embarrassed. "Your Honor, I am deeply sorry about this incident," Chief Martinez said. "Officer Mitchell's behavior was completely unacceptable, and we will take appropriate disciplinary action." "Chief Martinez," Maria replied, "I appreciate that, but I want to propose something more constructive. I want to work with your department." to create a training program about implicit bias and community relations. This incident shows that your officers need better education about these issues. The police chief was surprised by her response. He had expected her to demand harsh punishment for Officer Mitchell. Instead, she was offering to help solve the problem. "That's very generous of you, Your Honor. We would be honored to work with you on such a program." Over the next few weeks, Maria worked with the police department, local civil rights organizations, and community leaders to develop a comprehensive training program. The program included workshops on implicit bias, role-playing exercises, and community dialogue sessions where police officers could hear directly from community members about their experiences. Officer Mitchell was one of the first officers to go through the new training. At first, he was resistant and defensive. He didn't want to admit that he had acted based on racial prejudice. But as he listened to story after story from community members who had been profiled and mistreated, he began to understand the impact of his actions. In one particularly powerful session, a young black college student named Marcus told the officers about being stopped and searched 5 times in 2 months while walking to his job at the library. "Every time they said I looked suspicious," Marcus explained. "But I was just a student going to work, wearing my school uniform." Officer Mitchell felt ashamed as he listened to Marcus's story. He realized that his assumptions about Maria in the parking garage were part of a much larger pattern of discrimination that affected many people's daily lives. 3 months after the incident, Officer Mitchell asked to meet with Judge Thompson privately. They met in her office at the courthouse, the same building where their confrontation had begun. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, clearly nervous, "I wanted to thank you for the way you handled our situation. You could have destroyed my career, but instead you chose to help me learn and grow. The training program has opened my eyes to things I never understood before." Maria studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity. She could see that he had genuinely changed. "Officer Mitchell, I'm glad the training has been helpful. But the real test is how you apply what you've learned in your daily work." "I understand that," Mitchell replied. "I've already changed how I approach people in my patrol area. I ask more questions and make fewer assumptions. And when I catch myself thinking something might be suspicious, I stop and ask myself why I think that." 6 months later, the courthouse hosted a community forum on police community relations. Judge Thompson was the keynote speaker, and Officer Mitchell was part of a panel discussion about the training program. The parking garage incident had become a case study in how negative experiences could be transformed into positive change. Her speech, Maria reflected on how the incident had affected her. "That night in the parking garage was one of the most difficult experiences of my professional life," she said. "But it also reminded me why the work we do in the justice system is so important. We have to keep fighting for equality and fairness, even when it's hard, even when it's personal." In the audience, many people who had been there that night listened with pride and respect. Detective Collins had become a champion of the new training program. Ashley, the court clerk, had been inspired to go to law school. Even the young police officer who had told Maria to be quiet had become an advocate for better community relations. Officer Mitchell still patrolled the same neighborhoods, but he was a different kind of police officer now. He had learned that seeing people as individuals rather than stereotypes made him not just a better cop, but a better person. And Judge Maria Thompson continued her work on the bench, knowing that sometimes the most important lessons in justice happen outside the courtroom, in parking garages and community meetings, wherever people are willing to listen, learn, and change.